Hi, I'm Courtney at womenlivingwell.org, home of Good Morning Girls, and we are reading through the Bible cover to cover, just one chapter a day. So this week, you began your reading in the book of Nehemiah. It is so good, and today I want to talk about not giving the enemy an inch. Now, we are in a new year. We are a month in, and I'm wondering, how is it going for you? Is it really a new year, new you? Did you pick a word of the year, and how is that going? Can you even remember the word that you picked? I know that sometimes at this point in the year, we can feel defeated because some of the habits and some of the disciplines that we wanted to implement in our lives maybe aren't happening because maybe we've had some curveballs, and so we can feel defeated. And I want you to know that I understand. You know, I just finished a season of life. The last 8 years were the most brutal season of my life being a single mom. And when I came to the end of the season, basically last year, my daughter graduated from high school, so we had a little party, and then I was planning a wedding, which was beautiful but exhausting, and then we were packing the whole house and moving into this new home, and then packing again and taking my kids off to college. I dropped them both off 2 states away, and when I got home, I was like, oh, I am done. I did it. And now I want to rest, except the enemy is like, oh no, you don't. I am not going to give you a rest. I am going to continue to bring battle after battle into your life. And so just being transparent and honest, I am a little discouraged right now here at the start of the year because of not being able to hear out of my left ear. Now, I've shared that in some of my other videos that I'm struggling with this, and it is still going on. And so when the new year began, I was healthy and everything was going great. And then it took a little turn and I got a bad head cold that's now morphed into this. And to be honest, it's stressful because last January I wrote a book, I did a thing, and it comes out this April 16th. And so next week I am traveling to Columbus, Ohio to record the audiobook version of the book that is coming out. And I really want to be healthy and well. I have a little bit of a cough going, and I just feel like as I'm doing this reading, I wanted to be healthy. And so it's discouraging and it is hard. And so if you're in that place where you're like, goodness, will it ever let up? I hope that this encourages you today. As a matter of fact, I hope that my book that comes out April 16th helps to encourage you as well, because I'm going to share the hard-earned, priceless lessons that I learned during that brutal season, and I hope that it will encourage you to stand strong in your daily battles. But today we're going to look at Nehemiah because he is the perfect example of this. And so when we get to the beginning of the book of Nehemiah, we see that from the book of Ezra to Nehemiah, 15 years have passed, and 70 years have passed since they have worked on the rebuilding of the wall. And so God has placed Nehemiah in the king's palace as the cupbearer. Now, this is a really important role because he is the closest to the king, and he is every bit of food and drink that goes into the mouth of the king first goes into the mouth of Nehemiah. He is there for protection because basically kings in that day were kind of paranoid. The only way that you could take over the throne was through the death of the king. So either the king grew old and died and his son took over the throne, or he was assassinated. And so Nehemiah has been put in this role closest to the king, most trusted by God, because God has a plan for Nehemiah. And so when Nehemiah finds out that the walls are in ruin, he is grieved. And the king sees that Nehemiah is grieved, and he asks him about it. And so Nehemiah tells him, and he asks for permission to go and to work on the walls. And the king gives him permission. And this is awesome, except that as Nehemiah is putting it all together and we see God at work, in chapter 4, we see opposition. You know, there will always be opposition whenever we are following God. We need to expect it. We see that Nehemiah prayed and he wept, and as he planned, and even as he requested permission, there was not opposition. God was just opening doors. But then suddenly, as he begins to go through the actions of following God in obedience, that is when we see the opposition. And so we are going to see that Nehemiah was a man of prayer and Nehemiah was a man of obedience. And so that brings us to chapter 4, the 4 tactics of opposition that the enemy always likes to use against us. And let's look at the 2 ways Nehemiah defeated the enemy. So the first tactic, it's sort of textbook by the enemy, is that he used mockery. Now there is this saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And that is not true. Words hurt a lot. Words can discourage us. They can make us want to give up and quit in life, and they can do a lot of damage. And that is exactly what the enemy uses. In Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1, it says, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and greatly incensed, and he ridiculed the Jews. He said, what are those feeble Jews doing? And so Tobiah, the Ammonite, said, what are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stones. And so what is Nehemiah's response in verse 3? He says, hear us, O God, we are despised. Turn their insults back on their heads. What does he do? He prays. That is the first thing he does. And then in verse 6, it says, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. What did Nehemiah do? He prayed and he obeyed. He prayed and he got to work. And so since this didn't work, it says in verse 7 that they brought confusion to them. And so when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and Ammonites and Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, they got angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. Again, this is another way that the enemy works. And in 1 Corinthians 14, it specifically says God is not the author of confusion. And so what is Nehemiah's response? Verse 9. It says, and we prayed to our God and set a guard as protection against them day and night. Nehemiah prayed and Nehemiah obeyed. He set a protection and they got to work. Wow, this is amazing. So my question for you is this how you respond when people are mocking you, insulting you, criticizing you, stirring the pot, causing confusion, causing drama in your lives? Do you get caught up in that and you begin to defend yourself and get sidetracked from the calling that God has on your life? Because that is exactly what the enemy wants to do. And so Nehemiah doesn't get sidetracked. No, he stays focused. He just prays and he keeps obeying. But now he has a new problem. Now there's trouble within. It says in verse 10, in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we are not able to rebuild the wall. They're like, we can't do it. This is too hard. They are discouraged. And so in verse 12, the Jews who lived near came to them and said to them 10 times, you must return to us. You see that they are exhausted obeying the Lord and their families are scared for them. And they're like, okay, you've taken it too far. This has gotten very dangerous. Please come home. Has this happened for you when you have been obeying God, where you maybe share with someone your burden and you're exhausted and you're overwhelmed and they're like, well, just quit. You've taken this too far. Just quit. Just be done. No, that is not what God wants. And so Nehemiah's response is, he says so in verse 13, in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, he stationed people by their clans with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And so he found the weakest spots in the walls and he shored them up. And so that is what we need to do in our lives when we are discouraged, when we are tired and beaten down. Where do we need to shore up that weakness? We need more prayer. We need to fight harder. We need to rest more. What is it that we need? And so Nehemiah says to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Fight for your brothers and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes. Nehemiah reminds them, remember who your God is and remember who you're fighting for. And that's what we need to remember when we are discouraged. Remember who your God is. He is mighty. And remember that for generations to come, that you standing firm in your faith is going to influence generations to come, your children and your grandchildren. Keep on fighting. Do not give the enemy an inch. And so they do not give up. In verse 15, it says God had frustrated their plan. And so they returned to the wall and each labored on the work. With one hand they worked and with the other hand they held their weapon. And it says each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. Friends, they are locked and they are loaded. They are open carrying and nothing is going to stop them. I love this. But they still have a problem. more problems. They are separated from one another. And so they recognize this. They're like, but we are separated far apart on the wall. And so Nehemiah has a solution. He says, okay, well, when you hear the trumpet sound, when there's enemies coming, he says, when you hear the trumpet, rally to us there and our God will fight for us. Friends, we need each other. We need to not get separated from the church, from the family of God. And I know that there are Christians out there who just think, well, I can be a Christian. I don't need to go to church. And I'm going to tell you that you are wrong. That is dangerous. You know, out in the animal kingdom, when an animal gets separated from its flock or from its group, that is when it becomes prey, and it is easy for the enemy to attack. And so we need to stay together. We are stronger together. And I forgot to mention that I love that Nehemiah told them, do not be afraid. Friends, we need encouragers in our lives that say, keep on going, who remind us of who God is. If you have the gift of encouragement, we need you in the church. We need you to use your gift and encourage others and cheer them on and give them pep talks when they need them. Now, with all that Nehemiah faced, the majority of us would have quit. We would have been like, well, obviously, this is not God's will because there's confusion and there's trouble and all of these things. But friends, when did we begin to think that following God would be easy? No matter what in this world, he says we will face trouble, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. And so we need to recognize that opposition will come, and we need to retrain our brains to remember that all of us, when we are obeying God, will face opposition. We need to keep praying, and we need to keep obeying. Do not be afraid. God is actively involved in our lives. We can trust in him even when the enemy does not let up and he does not give us a rest and he just keeps on coming. Keep going. Remain steadfast in prayer. Remain steadfast in obedience to God. Do not give the enemy an inch, and keep walking with the King.